GetGlobal, and we are good buddies with the global sake crowd. We care about the same things, we like the same things, and much like the three blind men touching the elephant, we just touch a different parts of the elephant than they do. So where their agenda is to make sense, or to help products make sense in foreign markets, we're here to help in international expansion in general. So we're sort of like a, I don't know, Amazon or Walmart of these issues. So we cover a huge swath of territory. It ranges from policy all the way into topics like this from time to time, as well as top risks and key markets. So I've pulled together some excellent people here to help us understand what is it that happens when these products leave your hands, right? Some of the government affairs challenges, comms challenges, the business development opportunities. And this is intel from the field that I'm hoping that we can all use to our benefit. So I will turn it over here to Melissa Blaustein. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm the founder of an organization called Ally for Startups. We represent 40 different startup associations across about 30 countries, 4 continents, and we work primarily on making sure that startups' voices are heard in the policy conversation. As you can see, since a lot of people left for the policy conversation, this is the story of my life. It's so hard to get people in tech and startups to care about policy, but it is so important. And so I'm excited to be here, and I'm hopeful that we can have a great discussion about the implications of AI in the policy space.
Yeah, it's all fun and games until someone says you can't do business in their country.
Hi everyone, my name is Vishy Venugopalan. I am part of City Ventures, which is the strategic innovation arm of Citigroup. So our role is to actually promote innovation within Citi, and Citi is a large global organization, financial services industry, right? So it's by definition, it's large and it's in the financial services. So it's kind of the double whammy of conservatism. So we have to, our team's mandate is to sort of make trouble and promote innovation within different parts of the bank and sort of keep our eye on emerging technologies that are on the horizon that could be disruptive to the bank's core business, and sort of figure out how best to infuse these into the spirit of the organization. So I spend my time looking at startups. I'm on the venture capital team, so we invest in startups, and we also bring startups into Citi for commercial purposes. So we help them get Citi as either a partner or a customer. So we've seen a lot of global startups in a whole bunch of different jurisdictions with many different approaches to problems like lending, fraud detection, and all capital markets, all these kinds of kind of very typical financial services problems. And I have a sort of side interest in policy. I geek out about it on the side, and I too think, as Melissa just mentioned, that it's very hard to get people in tech to really care about policy and regulatory instances, but I think as sort of AI advances and it starts to kind of eat software as a whole, it's going to be it's going to be very important to get these things right at the outset.
And I'm Robert Pearlstein. I'm the Vice President of Global Business Development for SRI, the Stanford Research Institute. We're the guys that do a lot of things that you might touch and feel every day, but you never know it came from us. As an example, Siri for the iPhone was a project that we had done a few years back, and then spun that out into a company that was acquired by Steve Jobs. But also things such as, for those of you that have a Samsung Galaxy device, the iris recognition that you have on there was a project that I had done. We have lots of examples. To say in the area of AI, we've been doing artificial intelligence for probably about 4 decades or more. Both when it was up and when it was down. Now it seems to be back up again. And it'll be great to share with you some of the things that we're seeing globally in the market around artificial intelligence. We're doing projects in about 20 different countries. In sectors, anything from banking to construction to retail to you name it, all in the area of computer vision, artificial intelligence, machine learning.
So, Robert, you get to see who wants the coolest stuff, right? So you go and develop something with DARPA, they can't use it for some reason or something like that, and you've been working on it a long time, you know that it's amazing, and then you go and take it out to market for partnerships or acquisition or...
That's exactly right, Julian.
Right.
Yeah.
So I bet you're here for some interesting characters. What are the most interesting areas where you see a lot of demand and things that we might not be seeing as signals in the marketplace that this is maturing faster or gaining momentum faster than we might currently see it?
Right. So I put AI now in the category of blockchain and a few other things where it's kind of become the panacea of everything that's out there globally. But to say, areas, but we're working with companies in every single type of sector that you could imagine with regards to AI. I was just returned from Chile yesterday, and we're talking with companies in mining, companies that manufacture cement, agriculture. We're just seeing all different types of ways that how can we leverage AI for both doing prediction as well as recommendation and other types of capabilities. So yeah, just lots of different applications of what we're seeing out there.
Okay. So Vichy, you're in a massive company, one of the biggest international banks, and a lot of growth in Asia, a lot of growth in, I know for sure that there's just a ton of interest in Citi for penetrating these critical hub cities and getting deeper in fast growth areas. What are some of the interesting needs that you see in the organization and behaviors that you're seeing from consumers or clients that point to some interesting frontiers in how these technologies are applied?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, we see 2017 especially was sort of the year of the AI startup. So every startup, had AI in its pitch deck, and it was very hard to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. Having said that, we started to see some patterns. In general, we saw that AI was sort of very much hyped as the technology that would replace human beings and sort of take away jobs and all of that, which is a legitimate conversation, right? But in terms of sort of the reality, I think we saw that most of the cases were where AI was actually augmenting human capacity, right? So in terms of sort of very repetitive tasks, right, which a lot of human beings do in sort of middle and back offices, we found that sort of a lot of the earliest applications of AI were when essentially you were able to take a simple perceptual task like looking at reading off a number from an invoice, right, or something of this nature, and data entry and these kinds of tasks which require limited sort of human cognitive judgment. A lot of these can be automated, and leaving the human beings to actually focus on sort of more interesting or higher value tasks. Right? So by and large, so far, we haven't seen, certainly from internal applications, we haven't actually seen a lot of job replacement with automation or AI-related technologies. A lot of it has generally seen, it has come to pass that a lot of the technologies are enabling these kinds of groups to offer sort of better service, customer service, for example, or be more efficient with their work, and free up human beings to do kind of more human things, right, that were less automatable.
So it sounds like it's mostly staying inside the building rather than pointed out at consumers either for...
Yeah, part of it is, it's the nature of our business, right? Like we're not a Google, we're not a Tesla, right? So, our products are not sort of necessarily out in the field. In general, we interact with customers, in venues like on our website or at our bank branches or in kind of places where, we have some shared assumption of what's going on. Right? It's not sort of entirely mobile. So we're seeing some of that. The other piece is also that I think, one big barrier in terms of AI adoption has just been the availability of data, right? So if a process has not been sufficiently digitized, AI is like really light years away, because you need to sort of crawl before you walk, right? You need to have these things in digital form and data available before you can run AI on it.
So now switching gears a little bit, going back to what people think AI is and what it actually is. In some parts of the world, it doesn't really matter what it actually is, because the perception can produce some really serious consequences, and that's with regulators. What are you seeing, Melissa, in terms of what people think is on the horizon, and what can people be doing to help get the right idea about technology?
What's exciting about this space is that, as you said, it's really crawl before you walk. Everything is just now happening. And I think this is probably the first time I've ever really seen government try to establish policy for something at the same pace that it's being developed in this way. So there's a lot of opportunity there if you're willing to take the time to sit down and talk with policymakers and say, actually, the robots aren't coming for you. We're just trying to make this process of invoicing your company a little bit easier. But some of the things that I'm seeing are a real attempt to try to brand AI in a way that they can regulate it that will make sense for them. So a term that I see very often is the future of work, a task force on the future of work. And what that really is looking at is, how is AI going to impact our jobs, and what's that going to look like? And actually here in San Francisco specifically, the World Economic Forum opened an office that is focused solely on the future of work, which is basically asking questions about the implications for AI. And governments are really trying to catch up, but of course they've never historically been able to keep up with technology. It's always scrambling to try and get there as soon as possible. And so what we're seeing is they're putting out big calls. Like in Europe, for example, where we have several members and do a lot of work with the European Commission on the Digital Single Market, the European Commission has put out a big call asking innovators, what do you think we should do about AI? Help us come up with the best way to regulate AI and the future of work, which is one way to think about it, but when it's still evolving, it's difficult to try and regulate it. It's like how in the UK, as soon as the idea of self-driving cars came out, the UK government was reaching out to Google saying, hey, we want to regulate these, so what are they going to do? It's like, we don't know, we're just testing them now, we'll let you know when we figure that out. So there is still a big fear, but there's also for the first time a huge opportunity. And so those of you that did stay to be part of this conversation about policy and the implications of regulations for you and your business are really ahead of the curve. Because in particular, as you move from market to market, and there's a different set of regulatory constraints for each market that you're trying to enter, if you're willing to try and have a meeting with your member of Congress or with the European parliamentarian in the country that you're first going into, or I guess not in the UK anymore, but if you're going into London as a market, to try and really have those conversations about what your company is trying to do and why you're not just there to steal jobs, you're going to get ahead of the game and you're going to be better off.
The one thing I've seen is that they really want to talk to people. They do. For one thing, this stuff is cool. They want to know what's going on too. They're curious like anyone else. And they want to hear it directly from the people who are making this stuff, what it can and cannot do. But I'm curious, in your experience, which side is more curious about the other?
It depends on the policymaker. I would say government's more curious because they don't necessarily understand what it is, and startups are always, I deal primarily with startups, so not larger companies that have an established policy team and billions of dollars to spend on regulators, so it's more like small companies that are just trying to scale, and they're more interested in scaling their business, which makes sense, but I try to tell people, if you're global from the get-go as a startup, then you need to think about policy from day one as well, because if your product becomes illegal overnight, then you're really going to be in trouble. But I would say it's a balance, but policymakers are more interested in figuring out what things are and how they can regulate them than startups are about avoiding regulation.
To actually add to that, I agree, that's been my experience too. And it's also partially because the tech industry has historically kind of shied away or sort of not really wanted to engage with government and policy regulators. It comes from sort of a lot of historical precedent, but also, which was because the tech industry was, in the 80s and 90s was doing its own thing off to its side and was creating, interesting companies and, making, a small number of people rich. But now that number of people has gotten much bigger, and software is eating the world. So sort of that means that sort of technology is creating greater and greater externalities, which means that
And campaign contributions.
yes. And so this is when technology is starting to affect more and more, where you can sort of, like press a button on your smartphone and get like dinner, right? But in the middle of all of that, you're just address everything from sort of consumer data privacy to the future of work. How does the gig economy person who brought you the food actually get paid? Like you've touched so many different pieces of the sort of things that could be regulated, which weren't before. That sort of technology, hasn't had to worry about it historically, but now it needs to. And the other thing is also there's like a bizarre sort of strain of techno-utopianism that we can build things better than that the government can ever understand it. So like, why should we engage with them anyway?
I was going to wonder how you were going to diplomatically say that, because that's been my perception. I'm from Los Angeles. We spend a lot of time in DC. We spend a lot of time in LA. We go to foreign capitals a lot. And when we talk to tech companies, that seems to be the feeling until they get slapped. And then the tone changes. That's when they start hiring lobbyists and they bring in a government affairs team and things like that. And that's why you see Microsoft and Google, and now NVIDIA's got people, and it's they've got big teams for this. I will say one thing about the regulators and legislatives is that you meet these folks, they speak on the same panels at South by Southwest and CES, and they mingle there. They're out, like, especially with like drones, I saw this a lot, was the FAA made a point to come out and hang out and spend time with people and understand before they came out with rules. So if they come around, chat with them. So back to you, Robert. I was thinking a little bit about where you might get calls or interest or impulses from either countries or industries, and I wanted to tap this a little bit more with you, because I think here a lot of this is sort of focused on internet companies and services that are delivered by the web. But there's so much. I mean, anything from agriculture to there's so many applications, and it almost acts as a proxy for industries around the world to see which ones are developing or trying to develop most quickly.
Right.
Anecdotally, like, what's your survey of the landscape? And the reason why I'm asking this is that this represents opportunities for partnership. It represents a sense of the competitive landscape from here on out. What regulators in those markets will be looking at when they're coming up with their opinions and feelings about that, because they're not watching this at home.
Right. Now, I think from a geographic standpoint, Julian, we're working in a number of different markets, but certainly China is an area that is spending a lot of money in AI, as well as due to the privacy or lack thereof in many cases. They've been able to get a hold of a lot of data, and at the end of the day, it's really all about data, right? As we all know. So that's really an area where we're seeing a lot in terms of sectors where we're seeing, it's some of the previous speakers had spoke about health, and I think health prediction is a big area that we could talk more about. But the area where we're seeing a lot of interest immediately right now is more in industrial analytics. In the manufacturing sector, of course, you could get a lot of information. You could build a lot of models around that, and we're working on a number of different things. Literally, where we're using, to give a specific case, we're using computer vision as well as other types of inputs like thermal as well as audio, where we could literally track if a person on a production line is actually picking up the right part at the right time, and then likewise if it's actually being inserted correctly or not. And things like that were just not available, and this is stuff that's going to be available in the near term. So we're seeing lots of application. But again, China definitely is from a geographic standpoint. And I'd say manufacturing is probably the most near-term area where we're seeing the most interest and drive.
So I'm actually going to pause for a second and take a vote. This crowd seems pretty in the know. Do we think that the competitive advantage is going to tip in favor of China anytime soon? Has it already done so? Who is saying that it will not, that the United States is going to maintain the lead for a while? Hands?
Define a while.
Yeah.
What's that?
Define a while.
So short term is in political risk analysis is like less than 2 years or something, or within a year. So in the 3 to 5 year range, do you see the lead belonging to us here in the United States, or do you see this as like we're almost a parity? It depends on what you're doing, right? So
I think part of the answer to that is what is the government's position in pushing the technology forward. And I don't think we have an initiative here in the US that's government backed, but I think they have that in China.
we got certain Defense Department programs.
Yeah, but, I mean, just on this point specifically, I just signed a letter yesterday with 44 other trade associations asking the Trump administration to please rethink sweeping tariffs from China. So I think it's hard to answer that question until the end of this week.
Right.
I think a lot will be determined in the next couple of days, weeks, months in order to know.
So who thinks that China already has the lead? Okay, wow. And who thinks that we're basically at parity and it
Do you mean in AI or in everything?
in AI?
Oh, okay. Well, you're
No. We're at an AI talk. Come on now. So, there's plenty of things you can measure, right? But something like this, it's tough, right? Because, how often do we hear about? I mean, we hear about its uses all the time here. Some of the times we hear about. Let's see. What they're investing in, how much they're buying, and stuff like that. But it's still not. I don't know.
I'd love to hear your perspective.
It's hard to know, right?
Yeah, so my perspective is that the U.S. is still in the lead, right?
Okay.
That's my feeling. But to put it into perspective, there are more PhDs that graduate from Chinese universities every year than college students that we have in the U.S. Okay. So just to put that into perspective. The second thing to put into perspective, though, is that there's also limitations in terms of education, in terms of creativity. And we do, here in the States, we do excel in the areas of creativity, which I think ties very well into work around technology and around, of course, art, AI, and things of that sort. So, but long term, probably China will do quite well, but I personally think that we're still holding our own here in the States.
What do you attribute that to? Just a longer track record with this?
I think that part of it is cultural. Again, I think that you have a greater level of creativity here in the States, Julian, and that ties very well into anything around software and particularly as it pertains to AI and other types of advanced technology. But long term though, again, there's a lot of money that's being invested and things will change.
So I would agree with you on what you just said relative to where we stand. But my question about that is adoption. I think here in the U.S. we may have a slower pace of adoption of some of the newer technologies because there's a lot of legacy stuff that has been invested in.
Yeah.
And you get other environments, economies like in China, where they're sort of leapfrogged a little bit. And so I'm wondering if the adoption rate is higher, even though the forefront of technology is more here.
No, I mean, again, I'm working with lots of companies in different sectors, like the automotive sector, we've mentioned that a few times. You've got all the big players, tier ones, OEMs, they're all jumping into this in a big way. If you go down the peninsula there, you're going to see innovation centers from, GM, Ford, you name it. So, again, I think that there's a lot going on. I agree with what you're saying about leapfrogging potentially, that there's a lot of legacy stuff here. But I don't feel that the U.S. companies are making any less of an investment say, than Chinese companies or others. And I think we're in some ways making a bigger investment in areas like healthcare and health prediction.
Great, thank you.
If I could just add a point to this conversation, I think from my perspective is political, the power of the politics in China. I think the will is a lot stronger than here in the US, and also human rights. So if I use one example that I always think about is during the SARS, back then, they built a hospital for 800 patients. Was it 10 days? It was incredible. And they fixed it. They quarantined everybody. So that always stayed with me, how fast they can move. And that's not necessarily asking people if they want to be quarantined. It's just you're quarantined. So I think we have to think about that. And their leader has just now got unlimited power. So I think if you put those two, and also this is an area where AI that's very analytical, which is to the point that you're making with PhDs. So this is where they can run very, very fast.
And it's not only that they've got Xi Jinping with no term limits. Now, according to the 19th Party Congress, they can put, party members on boards of these companies and exert party will through the organizations.
That's right. And I want to make one more point that Wall Street Journal just had a video of a leader of owner of a manufacturer, a factory owner, and he was so proud that he's able now to replace, I think they went from 10,000, now they only have 1,000 people replaced by robots. And so the interviewer from the US asked, or from UK asked him, well, how do you feel about that? And he said, great. So I think it's that mindset where they're not considering the human component.
Right.
So let's bring it also back to, again, policy, right? So you've got things like that going on. There is a dash of culture in policy. So if privacy is just like, there's a funny exchange in India with a leading advertising guy there. Privacy, to make a long story short, I mean, he basically said, look, privacy is almost like a Western idea. Like, I don't know if you've been in an Indian household, but there's no privacy there. So there's no surprise that Edward Snowden phenomena didn't make headlines in India. No one cared. And in China, folks are not going to be freaking out about some of the uses of data and the ability to train AI. But coming back to countries like, the ones in Europe, dealing with the European Union, a lot of folks in this neighborhood stay up late at night worrying about what the European Commission is going to do. So what do you see going on there? Not only with AI, because maybe we can say, all right, this is nascent, it's still to develop, it hasn't hit puberty yet, but we're dealing with also issues like privacy, things that are first principles that inevitably will apply to that. So if GDPR is coming up, what else do you see?
Well, GDPR is coming up in May, so if you have not yet thought about or looked into the General Data Protection Regulation, if you have any person on your email list who lives in the EU, you are technically under the GDPR required to let them know that you have their information and you're using it just to email them occasionally, or you have their information and they may at one time receive from you an invite to an event. We, as a not-for-profit association, have to comply with GDPR and send everyone on our email list in the EU, especially, it can't just be a mass email that says, don't respond to this email. It has to be very technical. And so people aren't aware of that, and there's even more coming. So it's very difficult to compete with economies like China when the issue of privacy is so much a cultural piece of how we decide what data we're going to give up and why. I mean, one thing I see coming right now in the EU also, as part of the Digital Single Market's copyright package, the European Commission would like to outlaw text and data mining in totality. No text and data mining whatsoever, except for educational purposes, so except for universities. And actually I was at an EU event and I was listening to a policymaker talk about how great it is because he uses this new startup that lets him see what people are saying on Twitter and read sentiments. And I got up after him and I said, under your new proposed regulation, that's not allowed. So I don't know what you're hoping to have happen here. So it's a difficult balance. And under the GDPR, actually, with what we just saw happen in the last few days around Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, that Facebook would have had to have sent to at least all of its users in the EU as a note, a very specific note that said, this is where your data is going to go because your friend clicked on this and you're now, all of this is available to you. If you're not okay with this, check this box and then we'll retract your information. So, and it's coming up in 2 months and people in the Valley are not thinking about it, which is making me very nervous. So, I mean, and there's more. I mean, there's the e-privacy directive, which is also being discussed right now at the EU. And if you think it's just in Europe, that's not the case because other economies and other countries that care about privacy and data are looking at what's being done with the GDPR and saying, that's great, let's replicate that in Brazil. We're just gonna do the GDPR, but in Brazil. And no one's ready for the GDPR. And meanwhile, economies like China are moving forward very quickly with what they're doing with data. And we're seeing the same, the app economy in Asia is growing at a pace that we can't keep up with right now. So there's a lot coming, not to scare you, but just start talking about policy, please.
We got to wind up real soon, but there were a couple more questions if we can. And Vishy, what I was going to ask you was, you're seeing new companies all the time, and at the same time you're speaking on and thinking on behalf of a big legacy brand that is new to adopt technology. So what is it that's exciting you? Like, what do you look for?
So I wouldn't necessarily call City a legacy brand that is slow to adopt technology.
No, I said it's fast to adopt technology.
But
Didn't I?
well, I wasn't sure what you meant.
No, I meant fast to adopt technology. I've seen them do it. It's great.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, a lot of our work is specifically as it strategically relates to City. I mean, there's a lot of things that sort of I track as a sort of AI investor, but only a subset of that is relevant to my day-to-day work. So we are actually seeing, so number one is just the like full stack AI innovation, right? Like in the past, there used to be nobody used to really even think about innovations in hardware, right? But now what we're seeing more and more is the ability for advanced AI to be done on specialized hardware, which is low power, and doesn't need to live in like a powerful data center like Facebook's or Google's, right? But is kind of living all around you, right? And because of these innovations in hardware, we're seeing some really interesting, just ways to kind of open up, new use cases within AI. So to the extent that AI is not just something you touch when you look at your smartphone, but is kind of all around you. So that can transform how people do financial services, that can transform how people do healthcare, that can transform everything, all kinds of industries. So personally, one thing that is super exciting to me, and is going to become increasingly a case more and more in how banking is done, is like AI, sort of pervasive AI, if you will, because of new hardware innovations. And sort of the amazing software innovations that the previous panel talked about, as well as has generally been touched upon in this event.
Excellent. Any final comments?
Well, if you guys want to see where AI is going, I recommend that you go on YouTube and check out a video of the Yamaha Motobot. We had worked with Yamaha to create a humanoid robot that rides a Yamaha R1 racing motorcycle. And but what's really cool about it is that it's really what it was designed to do is to be a data engine. So it's collecting all sorts of data, be it RPM, lean of the bike, things of that, which is not only keeping the bike upright, but it's also having it go down the track. And we're also using machine learning so that every time that robot is going around the track, it's getting faster. So just over the last year or so, it's gone from about 100 kilometers an hour, and now we're doing about 220 kilometers an hour. So just to give you an idea as to where some of the types of capabilities that will be around. So Yamaha Motobot.
What are the humans doing? What is?
I guess that solves the question that we were dealing with earlier about how the bike stays up. So you figured it out, right? Adjustment to the.
Yeah, it takes in wind. It takes in lots of different factors, and but the coolest part of it is that again it's using machine learning so that it's able to it's improving itself all the time. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Melissa? Any final comment?
if you're interested in learning more about the General Data Protection Regulation, you can talk to me. We're doing an event on Thursday, actually at the Hardware Club, which is a really cool AI VC, Thursday from 4 to 6, and there's going to be a bunch of experts talking about GDPR and what it means for you and your company. So if you want to continue the conversation, I'll be there.
And Vichy?
We are doing an event tomorrow at City Ventures about the future of work. So, it's from 5:30 to 8. And if you want to attend, it's within walking distance, actually, it's within a stone's throw from here. So, come up to me and we'd love to have you.
Cool. What's next? Are we winding up?
I think we're going to get kicked out, actually.
Oh, wow. Oh.
Thank you all.
Oh, hey, thank you for this.